If you're a high achieving professional woman, you're likely suffering from some intense stress and anxiety on a consistent basis. Today, you'll find out why it matters so much to allow yourself to break free from emotional and mental limitations. In today's podcast, I am so happy to welcome a special guest. Susan Choi is an empathic executive coach and podcast host of Stressproof, a consistently ranked top 100 podcast in mental health and careers on Apple Podcasts. She is the founder of the Stressproof Method, a program that helps stressed out and sensitive leaders finally break free from emotional and mental limitations. In our conversation, she shares about the physical breakdown that was the turning point for her to seek a new pathway that leaves her fulfilled every day. Are you a high achieving woman struggling to release the stress and anxiety? This conversation is for you. Well, everyone, I'm so excited to be here with Susan Choi, who is really just here to be in this conversation around self worth. And she's the host of her own podcast around stress proof. And I was like, oh, that sounds like so relevant to what we're talking about in worthiness. So, anyways, Susan, I'm so glad you're here. We coincidentally found out that we both are in Seattle, and we're all excited because it's so fun to meet fellow coaches and entrepreneurs who are in the same place. And then I'm so glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's awesome. And really, this conversation to me is like a very natural progression around the experience in that journey of self-worth. And I'm curious for you, I know it's a very open question, but to really even start to look back for you, maybe where you even started to have awareness of self-worth, it might actually probably have started with awareness of not having self-worth, where a lot of the journey starts for people. And then for you to, just take us wherever you want to start with that, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're focused on such an important topic, such as self-worth. I find that, even what we're both passionate about is so intertwined because I found my own self-worth through stress and sensitivity. And basically, when I was living in San Francisco, I was working in management consulting at the time, very demanding project, lots of stakeholders and clients involved. And it was through that process and my eventual diagnosis of adrenal fatigue that I realized something wasn't working. And even then, at the time, I didn't know it was an internal job. So back then, what I was doing, I was spending thousands of dollars on medical bills, therapy. I hired like a public speaking coach because I thought, oh, if I can just work on my self image, then everything inside will feel better and everything on the outside will just, it'll be a butterfly effect and everything's going to be amazing and I can get back to my amazing life. But, as you probably are aware of, that just is not how it works. And when I was diagnosed with adrenal fatigue, it wasn't until, many months, probably like a year into that healing journey, that I realized that, oh my goodness, everything that I was doing, while it's great and everybody should, hire the appropriate doctors and mentors for your healing journey, I was basically treating the symptom and not the root. So sure, I was temporarily allowing myself to kind of feel better in the moment and, like feel peace, like let's say I'm meditating, I'm feeling peace in that moment. But when I would go back to work, I would still be the same person inside. And so all of that, firing and wiring in the brain that's happening like 24/7, whether we realize it or not, it was happening, but it was running an old default program. And that's, just to answer your question, that's kind of how I realized, oh, wow, like a lot of what I'm trying to outrun is this lack of self-worth. And that's
Wow.
what set me off on this journey of rediscovering, who I really am and what I really do back myself up on. And what I mean by that is what do I truly, truly love, appreciate, accept about myself deep down so that then I can shine that to everybody else out in the world. And so, yeah, it's definitely deeply, deeply intertwined.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm curious for you then, could you even trace back then where that programming started, being a woman or being a woman of color? It's probably a complex question, but I'm curious if you have just are sensing in or like what are the pieces that were particularly challenging for you to move through to get all the way through when you're a management consultant? Assuming all the way through college and work to get to that point where you hadn't really seen anything around it.
I mean, I think you just nailed all of it. I mean, I first came to the States for college, although I was in an international school, all throughout elementary and middle and high school, which is why everyone's like, but you speak without an accent. And yes, but, I grew up in predominantly Tokyo and Seoul. And, many people probably have heard all of the stereotypes, but some of that generality is somewhat true in terms of how you present yourself, how you look, what your grades are. All of that was just deeply, deeply ingrained. And I think these days too, every teenager now has a phone. And with technology, you can listen to podcasts and YouTube. And back then, it was just whoever you were friends with, or whoever you knew that could share with you what they know. And so I didn't really know much. And it wasn't until I got to college and started like really networking with other people and meeting people from so many different backgrounds and like learning different perspectives that I started to just slowly, very slowly, in baby steps, because even back then, everybody was also in the same boat in terms of not having this access to podcasts like this. And so, I would say that it wasn't until there's that saying where, when life kind of, gives you signs, you should listen, and otherwise it'll just knock you down. I think for myself, it was the adrenal fatigue that literally had to wake me up. And it wasn't even the diagnosis. It was like months into it where I was trying everything I could to still go back to that life. And that it just wasn't working. And it wasn't until I started to unpack, wow, like I can't even feel my own feelings in my body because I was using my mind to just outrun whatever feeling it was and like work harder, impress harder, lose weight faster, like do all of these things that we've been told so many times through advertising and billboards that especially women, you are not enough. Like you have to buy this thing in order to be beautiful. You have to take this supplement in order to look the way that you should, and all of those things. And so, yeah, it was just a combination of a lot of those things that you just mentioned.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I can see, different cultures obviously would be teaching that. And then also within the culture of the United States, there's its own pressure, especially around like body image and all of those pieces. And I'm curious then too, your journey then as a person of color who, came over when you were older, if that sort of reinforced programming or how you adjusted or dealt with that programming of like what it's like to be, people here obviously are all like, oh, you must be just Asian American. Like, what is it like for you? And if that played into it too at all. And I'm just kind of curious about your journey from that piece as well.
Yeah, and I had visited quite often when I was like very little, and then there was a gap where I didn't really visit America, as we called it over there, very often. But then it was, during that middle, like the high school years where you're looking at colleges, you would visit every year, and I just remember everything feeling so different. And even being discriminated against when we were really young. Like we went to Disney World at the time. My family couldn't afford much back then, but they wanted to give us that experience. And to this day, I still remember somebody from across. I think that we were in some kind of like a merchandise store where you buy souvenirs, and doing the thing with the eyes at us. And I can just being sensitive, I can feel my dad being kind of angry, but not wanting to show it to the kids. And so it is a constant fine line that I'm aware of, but I try not to give it too much of a story. And what I mean by that is, even to this day, if I do give it a lot of thought, whenever I go back to my home country in Korea, I don't really feel like I belong there because I don't speak fluent Korean the way that a native does. And then here, I feel so much more comfortable, but at the same time, there are different societal or cultural things that I don't really relate to either. So, for example, this is super simple, but when people quote very famous movies or books or songs, I don't, I don't know them. And so I just tell people, I don't get that. Can you like tell me literally like what you mean by that? And so, again, it's one of those things where I do notice it, but given everything that I know now about how so much of the story that we tell ourselves affects the outcome of our lives, I just decide to tell myself that's just not as important.
Mm. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. Like you're just like, oh, like I notice it, I observe it, but it's like doesn't have to be something that actually really impacts how I live day to day.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
do appreciate the diversity of the cultural perspectives that I have. I mean, two countries, Japan and Korea and America, and it's interesting. It's like there's the appreciation, but then there's also like not wanting to dwell too much.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think what you're saying is perfect because balance to me is like a continuous thing. It's like we might go too heavy one way and then you have to go back the other way and then you find that place of equilibrium and it is a continuous thing, which I actually really feel like is true also of self-worth. And I'm kind of curious too, like, so you took us through that journey where you had the adrenal fatigue and you were really recovering. And what would you say you found for yourself? Because I know there are listeners who probably have gone through similar things, like gone to a medical crisis, like hit rock bottom, and they're like,
Hmm.
okay. And then there's this, but the rock bottom is only the first step to that journey back up. And I'm curious for you, like what that progression of that journey has been like for you. If you could share a little bit more about it, like what's really helped you along the way.
Yeah. So I would say when it comes to book smarts, and I think a lot of people can relate to this. Like your grades speak for themselves, where you work for speaks for itself, who you know speaks for itself. And so it wasn't, I feel like self worth has categories in a sense, and those were all kind of like, those boxes were checked. When I hit rock bottom and I was starting to heal myself, it was understanding that I did not accept myself in the rock bottom. So, me being sick, me with my endocrine system just kind of being all over the place and healing itself, having depression, anxiety, which, um, really was taking over my life at the time, that I could not accept because I wasn't being this ideal image. And so it wasn't until I started to realize, like you so eloquently put earlier in the podcast, that I wasn't accepting myself, that I realized, oh my God, that's missing in my life. Like I didn't even know I was doing that until that moment. And so it was in, and I remember I have an Evernote of ideas, and I remember I was like 32 or 33 at the time. I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be the title of each age. So 33, 34, 35. And 33, I believe, was when I told myself, wow, this is the year that I truly understand what it means to love myself. And that was kind of where it all started. And in terms of how to heal, I mean, there were so many things that I did to try to heal myself. Everything from reading so many books on how, and I used this word before, but the story that we tell ourselves is literally creating the emotion in your body. And the longer that you experience that same emotion over and over again, creates a mood. And that mood eventually becomes your personality. And so learning little things like that and being very, very aware of how I was treating my own self. I mean, talk about transformation. These days, what I'm so proud about is if I make a mistake, if I were in a situation where normally I would be hard on myself, I mean, you better believe that I'm doing this. And for those of you that are not watching the video, I'm literally have my arms crossed, but I'm um, using my hands to kind of self-soothe on each side of my arms, and I'm saying, "Good job, girl. You would have talked to yourself so horribly before, but look at you. You're so aware. You know, I love you. You're doing a great job. Keep going." And that makes so much of a difference, because not only are you, talking to yourself more positively, but you're also giving yourself the acknowledgement that you're changing and that you have changed.
Mhm. That's so powerful. It really is. It's like to notice and catch yourself quickly
Mm,
in those
yes.
moments makes such a difference because sometimes, when we let it go, it can just take you into this really dark, dark place that you live for a very long time and it can be very hard to get out of it. But if you can get
Right.
it quickly, right, and you're just like, oh, and you're like,
Well,
oh
and
no, I'm
that's
doing
the
it wrong.
crazy thing that I want to acknowledge what you just said was so amazing is that we don't even know that we're doing that.
Mhm.
We think that what we are saying to ourselves in that moment, what we're thinking in that moment is the truth. And that's what's really scary, is that you've been listening to the same voice in your head for, I mean, some people, I don't know, whatever age you are. And unless you're able to see and hear and have a different relationship with that,
Mm.
you can easily believe whatever it says, especially on a bad day, and just think that that's true of yourself. But it doesn't have to be the case.
Yeah, that's so powerful, right? It is true. Like until you have an awareness that that voice is not actually who you are, it's just like a voice that's speaking in there and starting to distinguish that for yourself. That's when you can actually start to make the progress. So I'm curious for you, like, you had that period where you like kind of crashed into adrenal fatigue and then you started to come out slowly through books and I'm assuming through like mentors and some other things like that. And then what changed in your life? Like what changes did you start to make once you saw that it was important for you to live your life differently, because I'm sure it wasn't just like a
Yeah.
snap decision to make that change.
Right, right. I mean, everything from not caring about, I mean, this is going to sound so like just such a small detail and insignificant, but it was huge at the time. Is, because of the adrenal fatigue, I wasn't able to drink alcohol.
Mm.
And so being over at happy hour when you're networking or when you're going to a friend's wedding and not having a drink in your hand, not that I was a heavy drinker before, but just that social conditioning, that in order to network or seem like you're having a great time with, other people, it's kind of like everyone's drinking. And me saying, sorry, I don't drink, and really owning that and not caring, and that having that energy behind those words, and watching other people just respect that. Like they have no choice, right? And if they give me a hard time, I did not back down. I was like, no, I'm sorry, I just don't drink anymore. you know? So, I mean, those little shifts were also really important. I would say that how I started off every morning. So, for example, like not checking the phone immediately, but just going into, like, the moment I wake up, I say, thank you, God, thank you, universe. And then I just sit there and breathe, and I would do my meditation. And meditation, not as in, I mean, there's different styles of meditation, but it's like where I did the active meditation where I would list what I'm grateful for, what I was looking forward to that day, what I wanted to see in my future, like all of those little things. And I would just cultivate little practices like that. But mostly, I feel like the practices that mattered the most were the ones where I was also able to speak. So, whatever action I was taking to the outside world,
Mm.
because I felt like when I could really own who I was unabashedly and not be embarrassed about what I did or did not do or did not want to do, and say that and really own that, I think that's where a really big shift was. Because I think before I would have apologized or I would have made a lie. Like I would have just like made up a white lie about why I couldn't be there or what I didn't want to do. Whereas now it's, well, and back then it was like that slow progress of, before I would have said, hey, I can't make it because, and I would say what it is, whether I was going to a retreat, a personal retreat, whatever it was. Now it's just, hey, I can't, sorry.
Mm.
Right. And so it's like those little steps that you have to take, or that I had to take to really build that self worth up.
Well, I love what you're saying, that they are all these moments that you have to keep doing it. And I love what you're saying, because I'm assuming when you were doing the I don't drink is before, now it's like a thing where people don't drink and there's all these non-alcoholic beverages, but you had to just own the decision and the choice and not explain yourself at the time. And was it hard at first, or did you just get over that fast?
Yeah, I mean, back then I really did have a medical condition where I was like, no, really, my body just is rejecting this right now. Thankfully, I was surrounded by really, really, really good friends. When it was more so like the weddings, the social functions, where they really just, that was the end of the conversation. I would say in the workspace, it was a little bit more like, oh, why not? It's Friday or it's Thursday or it's Wednesday, whatever day it was, right? But, like it was just, it back then, it was a little bit of a harder time to have that be accepted.
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, and like you're sharing that because I love it that it is a journey that you're like, okay, self worth had to come from saying I don't drink, which socially and especially in the work environment can be really hard. But then, even how did you for yourself start to have the self worth to like start your morning off with that kind of really rituals and practices for yourself?
Yeah, I think that for a lot of people, sometimes we have to start with what we need and not what we want.
Mm.
And I think that for a lot of people, like they may see what's on social media or, in the whatever show we're watching and be like, whoa, I would love to have my life look like that. And there's this saying where it's kind of like sometimes we don't act on something until we feel a little bit of that pain. And I know that for myself, heading to the phone the first thing and making sure that everybody else was happy was not working for me. And so I just decided for myself that this is something that I need to do for myself. And it was through that practice that then cultivated into, literally a temperament and then a personality. And that's just how I have to be now. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
I would even say like social media at the time. I remember I think nowadays because people talk about it so much and people go on social media breaks, it's just so much more common. But back then, you know, um, there was no awareness that people were just posting things and that was really like the 50% positive part of their life. Like nobody was really posting like the negative parts. And I found myself every time saw a beautiful moment, or when I was off on a hike and I saw something beautiful, I would take a picture and post it. And I didn't know what was happening at the time, but I just felt this sense in my body that I didn't like what I was doing.
Mm.
Because there's this constant, like, rather than being in the moment, you're also thinking simultaneously, this would be great to post on social media. And so, I used to be a photographer back in the day. And so it's like the urge to get out for Instagram was even more because when Instagram first started, it was mostly just for pictures.
Mhm.
And so I remember one day thinking, you know what? I'm just not going to check it, post anything. I'm going to delete the app for 30 days. 30 days turned into now. And basically, I remember standing at the corner of a street where the bus stop was. And I just remember thinking, oh, I wasn't thinking anything. And my brain is so quiet. And the way that I tell people what this feels like is that it's like, imagine you're on a highway and you're on a really long road trip with a friend, and all of a sudden your friend turns off the knob for the radio, and it's like quiet, and you didn't even realize that the radio was on, and all that white noise that was in the background that I didn't realize was there was gone. And so those are just little things that I just started to do, and then it just stuck with me even to this day.
So powerful. I love what you're sharing too, that like you just deleted. So I love that you just deleted Instagram years ago when back in the day that was like the thing and you're just not doing it anymore. And I'm curious, you really focus on stress and emotional sensitivity for people. And I'm sure you're not telling your clients like, okay, go delete social media immediately because that's a big ask. But like, how do you start to progress people on that pathway then? If like they're feeling so intense or like they're on that edge, and they're like they could be at that point of like needing medical support, like how do you help them start to just ramp it down a little bit?
Yeah, and I would say not everybody needs to be off of social media. That just happens to be my preference.
Mhm.
I always joke around and say, oh, if I can go back to any time period, it'd be like the early 90s where I didn't have access to email or anything and people had to like knock on your door to know if you were home. But I would say that what matters the most when I work with people, especially whether or not you are aware that you're emotionally sensitive, is first feel the feeling and know how to accept it. Because most people, the way that they feel the feeling is by thinking it through and saying, oh, how am I going to solve this problem? How do I feel better? How do I make that other person happy? When did this start? How old was I when this? Because I see this recurring in my life. And it's like, wait a minute. The emotion that you're feeling in your body is here now. And that just needs to be felt. And so I walk them through the process of feeling the emotion in their body as sensations, and also just being able to not resist what they're feeling. Because when we resist what we're feeling, what we end up doing is we go to the pantry and we just want to endlessly eat the chips. Or we want to draft that perfect email back to that person that sent us that high priority email for no reason. And we want to just, be smart about that. Right. And so we think that those things seem so innocent. But in the long run, what we're doing is we're weighing our body down with this dense feeling, not even realizing that it's there. Just like the whole self-worth thing, right? It's like you don't realize you don't have it until, something happens. But even with emotions is we don't realize that there's an emotion in your body if it's not being processed. And you don't realize it until that moment that you snap, or that moment that you eat that one pizza slice too many, or you pour that extra glass of wine. And so that's kind of what I walk through people first is, what are you feeling? Like, can we just have a conversation with that emotion?
Yeah. Well, what I'm hearing too is like what you're saying is that when people suppress their emotions and they're not feeling it, is that actually is what leads to stress, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Over years, definitely. And stress
Mhm.
also is an emotion too. And, I remember way back in the day, somebody asked me, like, oh, yeah, and how'd that make you feel? And I literally, for 60 seconds, could not come up with a feeling. That's how out of touch I was with the body. All I knew was how to respond to something through actions in my mind of like, oh, well, I need to call this person or I need to talk to them and have this conversation. And then it's like, no, no, no. But how do you feel in your body? And that changed everything for me because I realized, wow, I'm not even in the body. I don't know what that means.
Mhm. Yeah. So what you're doing is like you're giving people this new language of like really relating to their body in a totally different way and starting to feel the feelings. And then I'm curious for you then, like, where does that take you? Like when you're able to say, okay, like I'm releasing the stress and then
Mhm.
I'm really connecting into my emotions, like what's possible for people after that?
Well, oh my God, I love this question because the first thing that comes to mind is that now you can have a different relationship to whatever feeling you have the most like hardest time with. And so, for example, I'll give you a real life personal example. One of my biggest, scariest emotions that I just really didn't want to feel was anxiety and just like sadness. And so anytime I started to feel that, and this is back in the day when I had no awareness that emotions were causing all of this to happen. But whenever I would start to feel that, I would try to numb that vibrational sensation in my body with food. So like the more food you eat, the more like chemicals loads your system. And then it's all of a sudden you feel different sensations. And so I started to unknowingly train my body to eat every time I had this emotional response. Now, whenever I feel anything, I would rather feel the truth of that moment instead of hiding the fact that I'm feeling a certain way about my life. And when I am in touch with whatever emotion is present for me in my body, I'm creating a direct connection to a deeper part of myself that must have felt something about whatever situation and therefore able to, whether you want to call it parent, mentoring, love, whatever that is, but love the part of myself that wanted to feel that feeling. And it just creates such a stronger relationship with your own self. And you start to trust your body and what you're feeling. And it just creates this kind of butterfly effect in terms of how you show up, how you talk to people, who is in your life because they really appreciate you versus, just for any other benefit. And so it really is a trickle down effect. Once you start to tap into what you're really feeling and honoring that and not resisting it and getting to know it, because honestly, the emotion that you're feeling is, I always say that it has wisdom in it and it's trying to tell you something. And the sooner you can listen to whatever that emotion needs, the sooner you are on your path to living an amazing life that's very present and full and real.
All of that is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Because really, I think that's sometimes what we get so focused on is like, okay, I want to get rid of the stress. But then, like, really, what's the connection after that? And it's just like to having that present, beautiful life that so many people are really looking for and desiring for themselves.
Yeah. And, let's use a real example, right? Like, let's say someone is feeling stress because their boss just messaged them on Slack and said, hey, actually, I need that report today by 5 and not tomorrow at 9. And so then you feel stress because there's a story in your mind that you're telling yourself about that situation, whether it's the boss, your job, your life, whatever it may be. When you can really feel the stress, tap into that emotion in your body and really, like, literally, I'm like tapping my fingers, like tap into that emotion and speak to it and hear what it has to say. It will tell you what is really going on beneath the surface because it has nothing to do about like the deadline being changed. Because if you love your job, if you're really, in tune with everything and you're in the highest alignment with everything in your life, sure, you'll be frustrated and you'll be annoyed and maybe you'll say something to your boss in the future about like, that's not cool.
Mhm.
but if your stress is actually saying to you and nudging you in a very loving way, like, hey, are you really happy? Like, what are you doing? Like, what is this really about? And that's such an individual question and answer. But yeah, when you can really tap into that stress, it's literally leading you down this path. It's giving you breadcrumbs. And that's what I get really excited about.
Yeah, I love it. Well, it's so good. It's like when instead of being afraid of it or avoiding it, which is what so many of us do. And I love yours is food. Mine's online shopping. So it's like when it's like if I'm scrolling Nordstrom, I'm like, okay, something is up. But it's like really seeing for yourself like what it is that is going to give you some information that's actually going to lead you through to the other side rather than choking it down with like chips or whatever else, right?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
the analogy I like to use is like imagine a flotation device. And if you're trying to press that thing underwater and repress it,
Mm.
it's just going to pop back up. It has to.
Yeah.
And that's the same way with our emotions.
It's like those dumbbell weights, like if you've ever taken the aerobics classes, the water aerobics. Have you ever done that?
No, oh no, yeah.
They use these dumbbells that are like flotations and you try to push it down. And like that's the resistance is you push them down, but it's really hard. And then you're like spinning
Yes,
around. Yeah.
yes, 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 yes.
Yeah. I
Absolutely.
had
That's
that
exactly
visual.
what it's like.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious then, this is a new direction. What would you say is your favorite thing about yourself?
Hmm. I would say the favorite thing about myself is that I'm always wanting to learn more.
Hmm.
Like I have this insatiable curiosity to understand like how things work.
Hmm.
And I don't mean, and it's very specific, like I don't mean technically, like I don't need to go behind Google Analytics and look at the code. That's not what I mean. But I love looking at different modalities, whether it's through spirituality, psychology, maybe it's astrology. Like I look at all those things and I see, like if it works for this, millions of amounts of people, what is it about it that gives them that acceptance? And I love finding that through line and trying to piece together like the foundational pieces that make it work so that I can then relay it back to my own clients and give them a different lens in which to see something.
Incredible. I love that. So it's like just put that perpetual curiosity and learning is a big
Yes.
part of it for you. Yeah.
Huge,
Yeah.
huge.
Incredible.
I'm
Yes.
always enrolled in the course, let's just
You're
say.
like, I always want to learn more. I always want to know.
Yeah.
Well, what would you say too, if like you're someone who's always learning, what's the best piece of life advice that you've ever received?
Oh, that is so hard to choose from. Best piece of life advice. I don't know if this is the best, but it's one that's most recent. So I'll use recency bias here. I heard that the more time and effort that you dedicate towards something is the more success. And we have to be careful with that word here because if you're dedicating time and effort to being negative about yourself, then yes, you will succeed in being negative about yourself. But the way that it hit me this time was how much actual time and effort are you putting into whatever it is that you want? And if you ask most people, they will say, oh, I spend a lot of time thinking about something.
Mm.
but they will not be able to back up the effort. And by the way, there's no shaming in that. It's just the awareness of understanding, like, whoa. And that awareness is everything, because it can either, have you double down, or it could have you create a different timeline so that you're not hard on yourself, or that you don't, unnecessarily shame yourself for not having something that, no effort was put into. So whether that is someone's job, someone's relationship or new relationship, whether it's a health goal, whether it's a business, I mean, I think that that's such like an amazing way to put something, because it really gets you to reflect on your own self.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It's based more on like the effort, the actual output effort versus the thinking. Because the thinking, that's thinking. You're just like in your head
Yeah. And
versus
it's easy. It's
in
easy
life.
to be tricked, because when you think about something, you think you're spending a lot of time on it. And you could be sitting here all day long thinking about what it is that you want. But if you're not actually doing anything about it, it's not really, there's no traction there. Like there's
Right.
no skill building, there's no experience building, there's no networking, there's no all of that good stuff.
Yeah, that's so incredible. I love that too, because it really is that action. Like I always think of it as aligned action. Like what aligned action are you taking? It's not just like, I'm going to think about this for a while and figure it out, but I'm actually going to move something forward into the world through the steps
Yes.
that I take. Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. So beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing all these things, Susan. So I love to leave people with a tip around their self-worth. So what would you say is like a practice people could put into place every day to start to help build up their self-worth?
This might be too simple to say, but I always say simple is best. Is every time you do something that you're proud of, I want you to say it out loud and talk to yourself, right? So the way that I do it is I say, "Girl, good job. That was amazing." Because in the past you would have said this, but now look at you. You're so amazing. And I really do this every day. And it makes a world of difference. So I would just say that if you're working on building your self-worth and you want just something super simple, but it feels good too, is tell yourself, girl or boy or whatever it is that you want to call yourself, queen, good job. And then like say why, like what is it about it that's such a good job?
I love that. That's so beautiful. So simple. And the simple practices, I'm with you, are the best one because that's really how we get through and build those muscles over time. So, so amazing. Okay. Are
Yeah.
you ready for our rapid fire questions then?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. Let's do it. All right. First one. What was the last thing you watched on TV?
What was I watched a camping video on YouTube. Does that count? People may or may not know this, but I love watching like people who go out in the freezing winter and like build their own tent or whatever it is, like their own shelter, and they do crazy stuff. But I love watching that stuff. So that's what I literally just watched.
I love that. I had no idea that existed. So that's like a
Oh, it
whole
does.
subgenre. There's so many like subgenres
I
of
will
things in
send
the
you a
world.
video after this.
Yeah, send me a video. Okay, good. And then what's on your nightstand?
Oh, I have an altar um, of just, my letters that I received while traveling, like just appreciation gifts. I have a candle. I have just things that remind me of what's precious in life,
Mm.
of past memories. I have a picture frame. I'm trying to think what else is on there. I have this is practical. I have my 3M earplugs. I sleep with them every night. I have eye drops. I want to give you all of it.
I love it.
And I usually have like a mug with some like sleepy time tea in it.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, be practical. I mean, some people's nightstands sound very minimalist. I'm always like, there's a lot of stuff on my nightstand, or like things on the floor next to the nightstand because the nightstand is full. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I will say though, I did do a total well, I pretty much try to be minimalist anyway, but I have gotten into this whole feng shui thing,
Mm.
and I decluttered everything that did not belong in the bedroom or the office. Like I
Mm.
put them all in its appropriate places, and wow, it feels great.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. When was the last time you tried something new and what was it?
Oh, Wow, these answers are coming so easily for me. I thought I would be stumped. So the last time I tried something new was 3 weeks ago, and it was my first pole dancing class. Yeah.
How'd it go?
Super fun.
Yeah.
I thought that I would be out of place, like that everybody would be amazing and sexy. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to stick out because I'm so robotic, you know? But I actually go there. Everyone is so warm and welcoming. And you realize, oh, it's an art. It's very technical. Um, you have people from all sorts of background, people who've never danced before, some people who, used to ballet and now they're doing this. And it's been a workout. Like I'm still sore. I'm just pointing to my shoulders. I'm still very sore from just, pulling yourself up just by using your back muscles and your shoulders.
That's awesome. I've only done it a couple times, but I also was very sore afterwards because it's intense. Pole
It's
dancing is super intense.
intense.
That's awesome.
Yes.
So cool. Okay, last question. What are the three most used emojis on your phone?
Oh, wow. Okay. I have the fire emoji. I have the crying emoji.
Hmm.
And then I have the twinkle stars. Yeah. Does that make sense? I don't know
Yeah.
what that one's called.
Like gold stars. I use that one a lot
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. It's like
Awesome.
3 stars.
Awesome. I love it, Susan. So good. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and, all of the work in your own story and your tale. What is the best way for people to reach you and find out more?
Yeah, so the best way is through my podcast. It's www.stressproofpodcast.com. And there you will find access to my podcast and all the free masterclasses that I have on there and other ways to work with me.
Incredible. And we'll be linking all of that in the show notes as well. And, Susan, it's such an honor, to connect with you this way, to hear your story and hear all the wisdom and the teachings that you're putting out into the world. And I'm just so grateful you were here for us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.